So I'm going to start today's talk by talking about a client of mine. And a client of mine who I've been working for a year and a half. He came to me when he was 19. He came to me with a substance use problem. He was 19, he had been using for the last 12 years of his life. During the course of time when he was using, he landed up stabbing someone when he was high on cannabis. He did every drug that you can name, from cannabis, weed, cough syrup, pain medication, acid, shrooms, anything, you name it, and he did it. He's also someone who, of course, did so many drugs, so well, he needed the money. And because he needed the money, he actually went around and mugged people, beat them up for fun and for money. He's also someone who managed to not only mug people but deal drugs again for money to his classmates and people as young as him or even younger. He's also someone who got rusticated from multiple colleges at different points of time, had to change multiple schools. He's someone also who took part in ragging and bullying of other people, very often got into a tiff. I'm going to let this sink in for a second, and I'm going to wonder what you're going to think about this boy. You're probably happy that he's not in your college, or this is someone you don't know at all, right? I'm going to ask you to hold on to that, and I'm going to tell you a story of another boy. Now, this boy is a 7-year-old boy, and he remembers opening his dad's whiskey cabinet and having a sip of his alcohol to feel better when he heard his parents fight, because sipping that alcohol was the only way that he could stop his heart from pounding. The same boy got sexually abused by his servant over a period of time when he was 7. He went to different schools. He often got bullied by people because he was fat and because he was dyslexic and dysgraphic. So he was often a target. He had to change 3 schools because of the bullying. One of the schools he entered, he was greeted up by making him lie on the floor and a bunch of seniors beating him up. He got bullied so much that at the age of 12, he and his roommate at the time were the central targets of bullying. He landed up finding his roommate's dead body after his roommate committed suicide at the age of 12. This is the same boy who had to save his mom from trying to commit suicide at the age of 13 because, well, she found out that her husband was having extramarital affairs. Again, this same boy is someone who's tried to kill himself multiple times. So I think he's tried to kill himself at the age of 14, 15, 17, and 19. Now I'm going to ask you, what do you feel about the second boy? I'm assuming and hopefully hoping you feel a little softer towards this boy, right? Now, what if I told you the first boy and the second boy was actually the same boy? Would you still feel like you wish you're not around him and you wish you never interacted with him? Or at some point you feel like saving this boy or feel empathetic towards his struggles and wish maybe you could be part of his support system or at least done something about it, right? Now, I want to tell you about what he's doing today. He's been sober for a year and a half. He's working in college. He's got his grades up. He's had a good relationship with his family. He's cut out everyone in his life who was toxic for him. He's maintaining new friendships. He's also somehow managed to get like the highest paying internship in his college. He's completing his work. He's part of multiple organizations that help people with substance use and mental health concerns. Now, this boy seems like a really valuable member of society, right? And here I'm presenting 3 sides of the same boy. What are you going to talk about this boy or think about this boy? I'm going to wait for a bit and I'm going to tell you what would actually happen to him if all of this did not take these series of events. Well, if he continued to be the first boy that I spoke about and you only continue to see that picture, well, he would be sitting in jail or remand home. Jail mostly because he was 17 above. What would jail do? Jail would give him a sentence of 7 to 14 years for the attempt to murder, stabbing people. I'm not even counting the charges of mugging someone, beating someone up, dealing in drugs, and other minor bullying. He would obviously be thrown out of college. He would obviously not probably have the best relationship with his parents, families, friends. So he would essentially be rotting in jail. I have nothing against jail, but let's assume that going to jail actually helps people for a bit. So what do you do when you go to jail? When you're given a sentence, you're spending years in 4 walls interacting with the same people, right? most days of yours are spent in emptiness. Because when you go to jail, you actually don't do much about what crime did you do. You're sentenced, you're served, you're punished, and you need to do something about that. I'm gonna take a pause here to understand what jail systems do in general to people when they're punished. Well, you get arrested, there's a trial, you get thrown behind bars. In the jail, you have certain duties to do, which you do. Now, what is someone, so that's what we do in jail. Now I'm going to use this and I'm going to ask you, what do you want with someone who's actually hurt you, someone who's broken your heart, someone who's done something wrong to you? What do you want someone who's done these wrong things to you to actually repent for you? Now, when I ask this, most research says that when someone hurts you, you probably want you want to hurt them back. Well, in the longer run, if you ask a lot of people, all they want is that person or that perpetrator to look them in the eye and actually apologize and acknowledge and take responsibility with the actions that they've done and accept the damage that they've caused to you in your life. Now, I want to ask you this question. Do our jail systems actually provide that opportunity in the first place? I doubt they actually provide that opportunity in the first place, because your very first sentence when someone gets arrested is, anything that you say will be held against you in court of law. That in itself removes the opportunity of someone actually being able to apologize or to stand up for their mistakes, right? So what does society want? Let's assume that this entire jail system actually helps someone, right? And it'll make this person a reformed person when they get out. What happens when they get out? Well, what happens when they get out is they probably don't have a job. We're probably not going to employ someone who's a felon, because, well, all offices do a background check. You're also not going to talk about where can he live. Mostly families would kick him out, friends would kick him out. People would not give this person a space and rent. Colleges wouldn't take them up, because colleges also ask you if you have a criminal record. So what is this person going to do with their life? Aren't we actually taking away opportunities from this person rather than helping them out? We excluded them by giving them a sentence in the first place. Then we also exclude them when they come out. What are we doing to ensure that when they come out, they actually changed? Does this actually help anyone? Does this help the survivor? Does this help the perpetrator? Does this help actually society at large? Well, I wonder, and I think I beg to differ clearly. Uh, so, what are you going to do instead? And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about restorative justices or reformative justices, with the idea that it's not like forgive people and let them do whatever they want to do. It's holding people accountable, and it's repairing the damage or the harm caused by the individual by not only punishing the individual. So I want to talk about what do you get by punishing the individual, right? When you talk about multiple research studies, we speak about how when you interview people in jail, most of them deny the reason why they got the sentence in the first place. That in itself shows that they don't have responsibility. So what are we getting by punishing them except for excluding them from society? Are we even making them understand the consequences of the damage that they've caused to someone's actions? Probably not. So what is reformative justice? Reformative justice is basically something that gives you an opportunity to talk to your perpetrator if and when you are ready, to hold your perpetrator accountable for the things that they have caused damage in your life. And it can be a variety of things. From if someone banged your car, you can easily talk about how they would have to pay for the damages and maybe volunteer somewhere with children, teaching them something. Or if someone was accused of molestation, they would go charge a certain sentence, but not only charge a certain sentence, but also understand the psychological impact that they've caused the survivor and maybe volunteer for such organizations, right? We hardly do this. Now, where does reformative justice come into play? It was started in the US in 1917. Now it's provided by law that US can use reformative justice. Most of them actually don't, because, well, the question comes, we are forgiving them or we're being softer on them. In India, we have reformative justices, but, well, we don't use them. According to a 2015 report, we are supposed to appoint counselors in multiple jails to talk to first-time offenders. The number of prisoners that we have in the country are more than 4 lakh. There is a report saying that we've counseled 7,000 of them. It's not even 1% of all of them. And what are we doing with that? In fact, even the 7,000 that got counseled, there isn't one system to counsel them. There's no system to hold people accountable, to tell them what they did in the first place was wrong. Does punishment actually help, or are we not actually having the conversations that actually have to matter? If the only way of communicating is punishing someone, I doubt that will change, because that's going to probably fill you with bitterness. And most research studies show so too. Let's take an example of school systems, right? with school systems, we've all heard about zero tolerance policies where, well, if you do one thing that is not in line with the rules, you are severely punished for the same. So when kids bunk class, they are not only thrown out of class for a week, which is, well, ironic, right? I bunk class and then I get punished in the way that I'm not supposed to attend class for the next 7 days. It's clearly not serving the purpose at all. And if you actually look at the data, it shows that when you talk about punishing in schools that cater to the low socioeconomical population, or so-called the margins of society, the more you punish the child, the higher the chances are that they're going to drop out. And well, if they're going to drop out, they're probably not going to listen to anything you teach them in school or have the opportunity to access jobs. So are we actually picking people up and throwing them out of systems rather than making systems inclusive? That's the question I would like to ask. Well, since no one's going to answer, I'm going to say yes. That's exactly mostly what we're doing. When we talk about schools, you have multiple programs right now in the country that are running on something called an empathy circle. So you have Teach for India and other organizations that run an empathy circle with children, where children get 1 hour to speak about their feelings. And when you actually run this, research shows that the so-called bad students actually end up making friends, taking responsibility, and developing empathy. Now, the question is, what is actually empathy? Empathy is experiencing someone's pain without actually experiencing what they go through in life. Now, how does that develop? So the client that I spoke about the first time in the talk actually learned to develop empathy, and he learned to develop empathy through therapy, through his survivors. So he actually understood that his actions have not only impacted people he loved because of what he did to himself, but also everyone else whose families he's hurt. He often spoke about how someone would feel when they came back after hard days of work and he just got them up and beat them and took their money away. He's extremely regretful, and his worst fear is to come eye to eye with some of these people who is hurt, because he has no face to show them, even though he every day of his life he's spending to try to better himself, right? It's the remorse, it's the guilt. How many times do we actually have access to people's stories and narrations? Very few times. We only talk about people's access to narrations that are the dominant narrative of society, right? The dominative narrative of society is everything that looks good and everything that's fun, because nobody actually wants to hear the sad or the tougher stuff, right? How many times do we actually have uh, access to stories of sex workers, beggars, people who have severe mental illnesses, people who are perpetrators, people who go to jail? Not a lot of times, right? And that's what we need to have access to. I'm not saying don't punish them. Nobody's saying don't hold them accountable. The idea is to hold them accountable and to ensure that they come out productive members of society with empathy. Now, what is the data? Where am I saying all of this from? So in a report in 2015, it was seen that 1,500 prisoners die every year in different jails in the country, out of which 77 kill themselves. 16 get murdered by other inmates, and another 200 die of unnatural, suspicious cause, which are generally speculated to be murderers. If you're saying that people were sentenced for ill behavior, you have murders happening in the institution. It's clearly not serving the purpose. There is no form of counseling. There is no form of people talking. Now, the different question is what happens inside jail. Clearly, it's not the best environment because it's a punishment, right? Nobody accounts for the trauma that someone would have to go through a prison sentence, or the violence that they will see once they're in the system. We have zero systems in place to address those things. In fact, it's seen that most people come out with more complex PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder after going to prison after their sentence. So what are we doing? My appeal here is simple. Don't put people into boxes. Make narratives easier and better accessible. Not only narratives of perpetrators, but narratives of survivors. Because no one actually wants to get up in the morning and say, okay, my day is going to be filled with hurting 20 people. It's just that we'll end up doing actions that tend to hurt people because we don't think about how they feel. So, well, take a pause and think about how each action is going to impact the other person and the survivor in place, right? Well, reformative justices help people understand that. It's seen that when someone is introduced to reformative justices, around 8% people actually improve as compared to the normal punitive system, which means that most people, actually around 75%, go back in the reincarcerations, so that they're double time offenders. Speak to people, make them understand where they go wrong, because that's actually where your key lies. So I want to end today's talk by asking you a simple question: what can we do to make these narratives available, and answering the question as to why I do what I do. Why do I choose to work with people no one chooses to work with? Well, I choose to work with people that no one works with, because they actually have no one or not multiple organizations of people supporting them, and that in itself is a lonely process and a case of marginalization. And to some extent, I relate to people like this, because, well, I come from that background. So I want to do my bit to be able to make a difference, and a difference that is larger than myself. And I hope by hearing this, you would want to at least develop empathy for people, and not write them off or fit them into boxes and make them come across as bad without actually understanding the backstory of someone.